Thank you, Sophie. Well, a huge day and night for South Australia as it selects its next leader. No doubt it will give us a few indicators on what will happen in the federal sphere in a few weeks' time. Joining us for our regular political forum, will be here all the way to the election, the member for Kingsford Smith, Labor's Matt Thistlethwaite, and from the Coalition member for Mackellar, Jason Falinski. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Tim.
Matt, I'll start with you. The SA election today, could it see a change to the trend of incumbent governments winning during the pandemic?
Hopefully it does, Tim. I think Labor's in a strong position, although they'll have to campaign right up to 6 o'clock tonight. I think this will be an election that is determined on competence. The South Australian Liberal government's had its fair share of challenges around competence in recent times. It had 3 of their MPs resign from the party and either move to the crossbench or leave Parliament. They've had a scandal surrounding the Speaker, and there's been a huge issue around their management of the hospital system with ramping of ambulances, a huge issue in that election there. So I think that you're going to see a campaign revolving around competence, and Peter Malinauskas and his team, I think, have demonstrated to the South Australian people that they are ready to govern, and hopefully it's time for change over there.
It's going to be tight, Jason.
It's going to be tight, and the polls don't look good, Tim. Let's be upfront about that. But if this is a decision on the basis of competence, then Steve Marshall wins this election every day of the week and twice on Sunday. There has been rarely a more competent government at state political level than the Marshall government that replaced a 16-year-old tired, incompetent, out-of-touch South Australian Labor Party. Their current leader, there's been no change in the South Australian Labor Party in those 4 years. It's headed by a union boss. The issues that Matt are talking about are entirely due to COVID. But I think back to your original question, yeah, this is a problem now. People are over COVID, they're over the restrictions of the last 2 years, and as sitting governments are wearing that. And we started to see that in Canada towards the end of last year when Justin Trudeau just scraped back in, whereas other governments in Western Australia and in Queensland benefited from the COVID restrictions we've had. So we're certainly at a point now where people are looking towards a freer and more open future, and they don't want to look back any longer.
Matt, what, if anything, can we read into tonight in terms of the upcoming federal election?
Well, I think it's instrumental, Tim, that Scott Morrison hasn't been down in South Australia. I don't think that the Premier wanted him there, to be honest. I think it's well known that Scott Morrison's on the nose, and if you talk about competence, well, you've got incompetence writ large in Morrison's approach to the floods. This is the bloke that couldn't walk down the street in Lismore or Ballina because his staff feared that he'd be harangued and harassed by members of the public because of their incompetent approach to the flooding. You add into that problems around rapid antigen tests, the problems around not ordering enough vaccines. It's no wonder that Stephen Marshall doesn't want to be seen campaigning with Scott Morrison. And I think that's a prelude to what we're going to see in the lead up to the federal election, this issue of incompetence of this government and their failure to manage fundamentally important things for Australians like the floods.
This is a point, isn't it, from the Coalition's perspective? We've seen Scott Morrison this morning, and we're going to talk about what has been going on in Labor ranks shortly. But he's come out and said, Jason, that Anthony Albanese's gone missing. But yeah, as Matt just pointed out, he hasn't been to South Australia, Scott Morrison.
Yeah, look, Tim, he's been in Western Australia where he hasn't been able to get to for 2 years due to, basically Western Australia closing itself off to the rest of the country. And when he went to Western Australia, the Labor Premier of Western Australia was quite happy to walk down the street with him. But when Anthony Albanese went to Western Australia, when his own electorate was flooding, Mark McGowan didn't want to be seen in the same photo with him. So if we're going to talk about those sorts of things, I think it's actually demeaning to the political process. What we need to talk about is that in the next 3 years, which party is better placed to deal with those concerns of working Australians. Things like the cost of housing, the cost of living, ensuring that our community is kept safe and secure through strong national defence. And what are we doing? Are we going to keep talking about climate action, which is a slogan? Or are we going to talk about net zero and how we get there faster and sooner, which is a solution? That's what the next election's about.
The tragic death of Kimberley Kitching at the age of 52. Matt, do your colleagues have a case to answer in terms of the suggestions of bullying?
Well, Senator Wong, Senator Gallagher, and Senator Keneally put out a statement yesterday. They've denied the allegations. They've pointed to a very strong role that they've played internally within the Labor Party and indeed within the Parliament, and in ensuring that we have strong policies to deal with these issues. I accept what the senators have said. They play a fundamentally important role in the Labor Party, and they're strong leaders. And Kimberley was a wonderful person. It's just a tragic set of circumstances. She was a brilliant policy mind. I know a lot of the work that she did around human rights abuse. The last time I spoke to her, she'd been to the UK to receive an important award for the work that she did around the Magnitsky legislation in the Parliament and ensuring that was successful. And her funeral's in a few days, and I think that we need to give her family the appropriate space and time to mourn her loss. And that's the most important thing at the moment, remembering Kimberley and the contribution that she made, not only to Victorian politics, but also to our nation.
Yeah, absolute tragedy, her death at 52. But moving on to the politics surrounding the issue itself, Jason, do you believe there are double standards at play with how claims of bullying or misconduct within the government have been received?
Yes, I do, Tim. And I think this isn't about politics. This is about the very value proposition that if you believe that no one should face harassment and bullying at work, and that's not just a slogan, then you walk the talk. And what we've seen, I think, from too many groups who are very happy to pile on when it's anyone else except their friends in politics is silence on this matter. And I think that does, they might think that it's helping their friends, but in fact, it's hurting the very people that need their help.
Now, the budget is just over a week away. It's a delicate balance for the Treasurer to manage, providing some support in terms of cost of living while not adding to inflationary pressures in the economy. I know you both sat on the committee regarding housing prices and its affordability or inability for many, many people. Matt, what do you make of it all?
I think this is one of the great failings of this government, Tim, the cost of housing. Not a week goes by in my area where I don't get a phone call or an email or someone stops me in the street and asks how their kids are going to be able to afford to live in this wonderful community. And the government's had 10 years to try and deal with housing affordability, and they've come up with nothing. Jason and I were both involved in this inquiry. One of the issues that we looked at was supply. And there's some recommendations around trying to improve the supply of housing to ensure that we're meeting that demand. And the only party with a policy to do that at the moment is the Labor Party. We're promising a housing future fund that will build 30,000 new housing properties throughout the country, affordable housing for essential workers like AMBOs, fireys, police, nurses and teachers. That's important to ensuring that we've got enough housing there to make sure that people can live in the communities that they work, and we're the only party that's offering any solutions around supply coming up to the election.
Jason, many won't agree with that, and they'll say that Josh Frydenberg has probably been one of the stars of the coalition through the course of what has been a difficult couple of years, particularly with the pandemic and other things that have happened with natural disaster. This is a tough one, though. How does he manage this?
Mate, you don't get to be Treasurer without having to make the tough calls. So, yeah, he's going to have to, I think, you'll see in the budget is short-term relief for cost of living pressures, but long-term reform to get productivity up so that we can start getting real wage increases into the Australian wage system and for Australian workers. That's the key to handling cost of living pressures. In the short term, there's very little that we can do in terms of the energy shock. That's a global shock due to partly because demand has come back stronger than we thought, and then added on top of that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the measures that we've taken to dissuade Russia from continuing with that invasion. So in the short term, there are things that we'll need to do to alleviate cost of living pressure. In the long term, you'll see another budget that is focused on reform, that's focused on getting productivity levels back up, increasing wages, helping Australians have an easier and better life.
Jason, Matt, thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll catch up again next week.
Nothing
Cheers,
about
Tim.
the
Thanks,
golden
mate.
slipper, Timmy.
Say that
Good luck,
again.
mate.
Nothing about the golden slipper.
Well, I reckon, okay, let's lighten the load a little bit. First off, I won't mention Manly and I won't mention Souths because
Not
Matt's,
again, mate.
Matt's,
Not
a Matt's a Souths fan and they went down to the wire to Melbourne and, of course, Manly got smacked by the Roosters last night. But I think bet with your head not over it. We've got Racing Dreams coming up in about an hour and 25 minutes. Fireburn. It's about 5.50 the field today. Fireburn is the second of Gary Portelli's horses. She's a mare and Brenton Avdulla on board. Just a little bit each way. $2 each way, gentlemen.
As long as she can handle the wet.
She can. She can. She's coming out of barrier one. We look forward to chatting with you next week.
See you, Tim. Thanks, mate.
Thanks.